Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today, we have an incredibly ambitious mission for you. We are looking at a medical frontier that, honestly, it sounds like it was pulled straight out of a science fiction novel.
Yeah, it really does.
But it is a very real, meticulously planned proposal. We are exploring this concept of in utero heart transplantation. So, literally performing a heart transplant on a developing fetus before it is even born.
Right, which is just mind-bending to even think about.
Exactly. And to guide us through this, we're digging into a fascinating paper authored by this trio of visionary thinkers. We've got Dr. Boris Petrakovsky, who's a professor of obstetrics and gynecology.
And Dr. Arkady Yarish from Mount Sinai Medical Center.
Yeah, and Lev Motin. And for those of you listening who really appreciate diving down these kinds of intellectual rabbit holes, Lev Motin is a former researcher at Brookhaven National Laboratory. He's also the mind behind the YouTube channel Uncompressed Thinking.
Which is such a fantastic resource, by the way. I highly recommend Uncompressed Thinking for these sorts of paradigm-shifting ideas.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely check that out. So our goal today isn't to get bogged down in all the heavy medical jargon, right? We just want to understand the underlying logic here. Like, why are these authors arguing that moving a super complex procedure into the womb is actually the logical next step?
Because the postnatal problem, like right after birth, is severe. And
Right.
that's the whole driver behind this proposal.
Right, because my immediate reaction to this paper, and I imagine you listening right now are probably thinking the exact same thing, is just, why not wait?
Yeah, it seems way easier.
I mean, it seems infinitely more practical to let the baby be born and then do the surgery on a patient you can actually, see and touch, rather than trying to operate on this tiny moving target floating in amniotic fluid.
Well, to understand why doctors can't just wait, we really have to look at the transition a baby's body goes through at the exact moment of birth. I mean, the paper points out that fatal congenital heart defects affect about 1 in 4,000 births in the U.S.
So we're talking about roughly, 1,000 affected fetuses a year?
Yeah, about 1,000 in the U.S. and over 40,000 worldwide. So there's this huge population of newborns who need a new heart immediately.
But I still struggle with the mechanism. Like, why is operating right after birth such a uniquely terrible time to do it?
It comes down to profound hemodynamic instability. See, inside the womb, the mother's body is doing all the heavy lifting. But the exact second that umbilical cord is cut.
The baby's suddenly on its own.
Exactly. The newborn takes his first breath, and suddenly its own lungs have to oxygenate the blood, and its own heart has to pump that blood everywhere. If the heart is severely defective, it just can't handle that massive, sudden workload.
So the whole system just sort of crashes.
Yeah, blood pressure drops precipitously, oxygen levels plummet, and the newborn goes into a state of shock.
I want to look back at the historical context the paper gives us because, this isn't just theoretical. The very first human heart transplant in the United States was actually on an infant, not an adult.
Right, in 1967.
Yeah, 1967 in Brooklyn, Dr. Adrian Kontrowitz performed the surgery on an infant who was in exactly that kind of postnatal crisis.
And that 1967 case perfectly shows the physiological wall surgeons hit. I mean, Dr. Kontrowitz actually completed the surgery. The physical connections between the new heart and the infant's blood vessels held.
Oh, so the technical surgery worked.
Technically, yes. But the infant tragically died just 6.5 hours later.
And the paper attributes that failure to severe acidosis. So let's break down the mechanics of what that actually means for the listener, because it wasn't a failure of the surgeon's hands, right? It was a failure of the environment.
Right. Acidosis is basically this catastrophic chemical cascade. When the broken heart fails to deliver oxygenated blood, the baby's cells don't just shut down quietly. They switch to an emergency backup system called anaerobic metabolism.
Which is an oxygen-free system, right? Like when you do a super heavy workout and your muscles start to burn.
Exactly the same process.
Yep.
It produces lactic acid. But in this instant, that acid was building up in the bloodstream of the entire body.
So as that acid accumulates, the pH of the blood just drops off a cliff.
Right. And if the blood becomes too acidic, your fundamental cellular machinery just breaks down. The proteins in the heart muscle itself literally change shape. They lose their ability to contract.
Oh, wow. So that's why the 1967 transplant failed.
Yeah. By the time the infant was on the table, their body had been starved of oxygen for so long that the blood was intensely acidic. So even after the healthy donor heart was connected, that acidic blood just circulated through it and paralyzed the new muscle.
The system poisoned the cure.
Exactly. Waiting until birth forces surgeons to operate on a patient experiencing active organ failure.
Like trying to install a new engine while the car is literally melting down. which, makes the argument for operating before birth incredibly compelling. Which leads us to the big biological advantage here. The authors say the placenta is the main reason this could actually work.
Well, to appreciate the placenta's role, think about how postnatal open-heart surgery is done. To replace a heart, you have to stop it. And to keep the patient alive, you hook them up to a cardiopulmonary bypass machine.
Which is just a big mechanical pump and oxygenator. But those machines are incredibly traumatic, right? Especially for a tiny newborn.
Oh, massively traumatic. You're forcing a fragile infant's entire blood volume through all these plastic tubes and artificial filters. It shreds red blood cells, it triggers the immune system, and it causes huge inflammation.
But, and this is the crazy part, a fetus doesn't need a mechanical bypass machine because it already has a biological one.
Right, the placenta. Before birth, the fetus isn't using its lungs at all. They're just filled with fluid. The placenta handles everything.
It's like the ultimate, completely natural heart-lung bypass machine.
Exactly. It delivers oxygen, pulls out carbon dioxide, filters waste, regulates temperature. And it does all of that without shredding blood cells or causing inflammation.
So surgically, that is a total game changer.
It's massive. It means a surgeon could clamp the major vessels, stop the fetal heart, or even completely remove it, and the baby doesn't immediately crash. The placenta just keeps calmly oxygenating the blood.
Wow, so the mother's biology provides this amazing safety net. You get a stable environment instead of a crashing one. But, okay, so the plumbing issue is solved by the placenta. But solving the plumbing doesn't solve the long-term biology.
Right, the immune system.
Yeah, because if you get a new heart, your body naturally wants to attack it as an invader. How does doing this in the womb solve the whole organ rejection problem?
Well, rejection is the dark cloud over every transplant. Postnatal patients have to take heavy, toxic immunosuppressant drugs for their entire lives just to keep their body from attacking the organ.
And those drugs have terrible side effects. I mean, they leave kids vulnerable to severe infections, and they can even cause kidney failure or increase cancer risks over time.
But the authors argue that doing the surgery in utero actually exploits this temporary, unique loophole in human biology. They call it the fetal immune window.
The blank slate.
Exactly. Early in pregnancy, the fetal immune system is basically a blank slate. The biological rules that tell the body the difference between its own cells, and non-self foreign invaders haven't matured yet.
So it's kind of like a bouncer at a club who hasn't been given the VIP list yet. If you walk in right then, the bouncer just assumes you belong there.
That is a perfect analogy. The thymus, which is the organ that trains T cells to attack foreign stuff, is still developing. So the fetal immune system just favors tolerance. It's actively trying to figure out what belongs.
And the paper points out that this isn't just some wild theory, right? They've already proven this works with stem cell transplants in the womb.
Yeah, researchers have introduced donor stem cells into a fetus during this exact window, and because the immune system is still writing its rule book, it sees those foreign cells and just categorizes them as self.
So they just stay there, and the body never attacks them.
Right. They engraft and multiply long after the baby is born. No rejection.
So the implication for a heart transplant is just staggering. If you introduce a donor heart during this blank slate window, the fetus might literally accept this massive piece of foreign tissue as its own organ.
Exactly. And if that holds true, you completely eliminate the need for those toxic anti-rejection drugs. The child just lives a normal life.
That would just fundamentally rewrite transplant medicine. You aren't just treating the problem, you're actually tricking the biology into accepting the cure.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Okay, so I buy the biological argument. The placenta keeps them stable, the immune system accepts the heart. But I have to push back on the physical mechanics of this. We are talking about millimeter-wide blood vessels on a tiny fetus inside the uterus. How on earth do you physically connect a donor heart?
It's a huge challenge. And you're right to question it because traditional needle and thread sutures would be a nightmare.
Yeah, sewing microscopic vessels with a needle sounds impossible.
It causes too much tissue trauma, it creates tiny holes that leak or cause blood clots, and crucially, it just takes way too long.
Time is the big enemy here. The paper talks about the warm ischemia limit. What exactly is that?
Warm ischemia is the amount of time an organ sits at normal body temperature without any blood flow. See, when cells are warm, their metabolism is high. They burn through their energy reserves super fast, specifically a molecule called ATP.
And when the ATP runs out, the cells just die.
Yeah, the cellular pumps fail, the cells swell up, and the tissue starts dying. For a heart, the authors state the absolute maximum warm ischemia time is about 10 minutes.
Wait, 10 minutes. So they have to connect everything and restore blood flow in 600 seconds, or the new heart is permanently damaged.
Exactly. Which is why traditional suturing is completely out of the question. Instead, the authors point to this incredibly advanced tech, laser-assisted vascular welding.
Laser welding blood vessels. Okay, I need to know how that works because it honestly sounds like you would just burn right through the tissue.
It requires insane precision. The surgeons apply a biological solder, usually a protein solution like albumin, right around the edges of the two blood vessels they want to connect. Then they use a low-power, specially tuned laser to heat that solder.
Oh, so the laser isn't cutting anything, it's just heating up the protein solution.
Right, it heats it just enough to melt it. The proteins denature and fuse with the collagen in the vessel walls. And as soon as you turn the laser off, the protein cools and solidifies in a fraction of a second.
So you get an instant, watertight seal without poking a single hole in the vessel.
Exactly. They also talk about using special surgical adhesives and anastomotic couplers, which are basically tiny mechanical rings that snap the vessels together instantly.
Okay, so the tools do exist to make it faster, but still, a 10-minute limit. Doing a full organ swap in 10 minutes seems like zero room for error. But the authors brought up this workaround that completely blew my mind. Partial heart transplantation?
Yes, this is a brilliant strategic shift. When we say transplant, we naturally think about replacing the whole thing. But in a lot of fatal congenital heart defects, the entire heart isn't actually broken.
Right, like the upper chambers, the atria might be totally fine.
Exactly. The fatal defect is usually just in the lower pumping chambers, the ventricles, or the valves. So why remove the healthy tissue?
You just leave the top half alone and only replace the broken parts.
Right. You just weld on the corresponding donor ventricles. And surgically, this is way, way better. It drastically reduces how many vascular connections the surgeon has to make.
Because instead of connecting a bunch of tiny individual veins, you're just making one or two large connections at the ventricle level.
Exactly. Fewer connections and larger connections.
Yeah.
It makes that 10-minute window totally achievable.
It turns this sci-fi fantasy into an actual engineering problem. But, I always try to play the skeptic for the listeners. Has anything like this ever actually been done? Like transplanting a solid organ into a fetus?
Surprisingly, yes. The proof of concept actually comes from kidney transplants. It's called in utero kidney transplantation, or IUKT.
Okay, kidneys. Let's dig into that because a kidney is a filter, not a pump. Why were surgeons putting kidneys into fetuses?
It was developed for a universally fatal condition called Potter sequence. It happens when a fetus just fails to develop working kidneys at all.
But wait, earlier we said the placenta handles waste removal, so the fetus doesn't die of kidney failure in the womb, right?
The placenta does filter the waste, yes.
Right.
But fetal kidneys have another super critical mechanical job. Fetal urine is actually the main component of amniotic fluid in later pregnancy.
Oh, wow. So no kidneys means no urine, which means the amniotic fluid just disappears.
Exactly. And amniotic fluid isn't just a cushion. The baby actually breathes it in and out. That fluid pressure physically stretches the lung tissue, which forces the lungs to grow.
So without the fluid, the lungs are just crushed against the chest wall.
Right. It's called pulmonary hypoplasia. When the baby is born, it literally has no lung capacity and suffocates. So researchers realized they had to restore the fluid to save the lungs.
Which meant they had to implant a working kidney.
And they proved it was possible. They successfully implanted a donor kidney into a fetus, connected the blood vessels with microsurgery, and the organ actually powered up.
It filtered the blood and made urine?
Yes. It restored the amniotic fluid and the lungs developed normally.
That is just incredible. If the vascular connections hold for a kidney and the fetal environment supports a solid organ, then the blueprint is there. A partial heart really is the logical next step.
It really is.
So, practically speaking, how do Dr. Petrikovsky, Dr. Urish, and Levine Moten propose we get this out of a paper and into an operating room? Are doctors doing this tomorrow?
Well, no, not tomorrow. They recognize this needs a very methodical, four-step roadmap. And step one is exactly where you'd expect: animal models.
Right, getting the repetitions in. You can't just try a 10-minute laser weld on a human for the first time. They have to perfect those delicate tools on fetal animal tissue first.
Exactly. And the animal models let them solve step two, which is optimizing ex vivo organ preservation. Like, how do you prep and transport the donor heart?
Because you can't just throw a tiny fetal heart in a cooler with some ice.
Right.
that damages the cells.
Right. They have to perfect these perfusion systems, basically machines that pump warm, nutrient-rich, oxygenated fluid through the donor heart while it's in transit. So it stays metabolically stable right up until the laser welding.
Okay, so they dial in the mechanics and preservation in the lab. But moving to humans is a whole other beast ethically.
That's step 3. They stress that we have to work with transplant networks like UNO's the United Network for Organ Sharing right now, because the current rules for organ allocation don't even have a framework for fetuses.
Yeah, how do you manage donor consent for a patient that isn't even born yet?
Yeah.
The rules have to be rock solid.
Very strict, very transparent, and that infrastructure has to be locked down before step 4, human pilot studies, which brings up the absolute most critical rule of fetal medicine.
Because you're dealing with two patients, right? The fetus and the mother.
Yes, and under guidelines from groups like NAFTINet, maternal safety is the absolute priority. The mother is undergoing a major surgery to treat the fetus. Her health, her bodily autonomy, that always comes first.
Wow. So this really isn't just a wild fantasy. It's a meticulously planned near-future reality. I mean, we've covered so much ground here. We started with the harsh reality of postnatal surgery, where a tiny infant's body just collapses under severe acidosis.
Right, and we saw how moving to the prenatal environment changes everything. The placenta acts as this flawless, natural life support system.
And then there's the fetal immune window, that temporary blank slate that might let the baby accept a foreign heart without a lifetime of heavy drugs. Add in laser welding and partial transplants, and it all just clicks into place. Again, huge shout out to the visionary authors, including Lev Moten and his uncompressed thinking channel, for mapping this all out.
It's an incredible piece of analysis that really could save thousands of lives.
But before we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We spent a lot of time talking about that fetal immune window, that period where the thymus hasn't learned to attack foreign cells yet.
Right, using it to sneak a heart past the body's defenses.
Exactly. So here's my question. If we know how to use that specific window of development to make the body register something foreign as self, what else could we program?
Oh, wow.
Right. Could doctors theoretically introduce specific allergens into a fetus during that window? Permanently programming their immune system so they never develop life-threatening allergies?
Or even train the immune system before birth so it never develops autoimmune diseases, things like type 1 diabetes or lupus, where the body attacks its own tissue.
Exactly. If we can use the womb to teach the body not to attack a completely new heart, what else can we teach it before the baby takes its first breath? Something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring.